You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 154 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'm happy to be sharing a conversation that I had with Tracy B. In January, I received a text from Diana in Sacramento suggesting that I had her sponsor Tracy on as a guest. And Diana was on episode 136, which was the Summer of Sponsorship workshop that we were both panelists for. So in my conversation with Tracy, among other things, we talked about the safety of women's meetings and of mixed meetings. In line with that, I wanted to read a few sections from the SAA pamphlet, Safe and Sexually Sober Meetings, Helping Women Feel Welcome in Your Meeting. And I'll be reading from the bottom of page 2 through the bottom of page 4. Many of us, male, female, or transgender, came into the fellowship with preconceived ideas about the nature of our addiction. For example, we may not believe that women can be real sex addicts. We may even encourage them to attend meetings in another 12-step fellowship where they may be more comfortable, furthering this mistaken belief. However, we did find when we share together at meetings simply as sex addicts that we are more alike than not. As sex addicts, we have found ourselves objectifying others regardless of gender. Men and women alike have had difficulty seeing each other as anything but caricatures, exaggerating the other's differences and discounting or denying the similarities. We may have feared acting out with or being triggered by members of another gender, or we may have concerns about triggering them. Additionally, for those of us in relationships, our partners may be opposed to our attending mixed meetings. As well as these issues between men and women, there are often issues among women themselves, which make it difficult for the woman newcomer to return to our meetings. Women sex addicts may view female newcomers as competition or as untrustworthy. On the other hand, women may be overly enthusiastic in their welcome of the woman newcomer, which can be just as disconcerting to her as being rejected or ignored. These behaviors, fears, and misconceptions often create barriers between men and women, and even between existing women members and the woman newcomer, pushing us apart rather than drawing us together. However, when we place our trust in a higher power of our own understanding, we are able to join in unity to recover from sex addiction. And the next section is Sober Meetings, Safe Meetings. While people from all walks of life can have their lives wrecked by addictive sexual behaviors, so too can people from all walks of life experience a restoration to sanity and a spiritual awakening by working the 12 steps of Sex Addicts Anonymous. Knowing this to be true, the most important thing we can do is to maintain our own sobriety through the spiritual growth that results from working the steps. A group that maintains spiritual growth and works towards sobriety will inevitably become more attractive to newcomers. Becoming a more welcoming meeting starts well before any newcomer shows up. Members of a group that is truly carrying the message will be less likely to engage in behavior that may threaten or confuse a newcomer regardless of gender. A newcomer in a sober meeting is also more likely to conclude that the group has what he or she wants and that it is worthwhile to come back. Many of our groups hold annual group conscience or group inventory meetings in which we examine the health and sobriety of the group. Questions examined might include how many members of the group are working the steps with the sponsor and how many have completed the steps at least once. We might also ask whether the general amount of sobriety time the group has is growing or staying stuck. Members who are qualified and available to be sponsors and temporary sponsors can be identified and made known to other group members. It is a good idea to establish sobriety requirements for trusted servants if practical. Using the SAA group guide as the meeting format is an excellent way to ensure that a group is clearly carrying the message of recovery. In particular, reading the SAA meeting boundary statement from Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 12, helps to remind us all what behavior is appropriate in a sober group. In a sober meeting, sharing centers on our sobriety and our new life in recovery. Graphic language, body part descriptions, and references to places we acted out are discouraged. It is suggested that our attire reflect our group's commitment to recovery. The shares focus on recovery rather than on acting out. Healthy and safe meetings bond in the solution to the problem. Unhealthy and unsafe meetings bond in the problem. And I'm going to stop there. After sharing my conversation with Tracy, I will be talking about the boundary statement that is on page 12 from the Green Book in response to an email that we got. In addition, I'll be sharing some music that Tracy had mentioned in our email exchange that I wanted to include on this episode. And before turning it over to the conversation, I wanted to mention that Tracy's power was out when we started our recording. She had a backup generator that she was using. And so the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about the power going out during a recording, and it happened to go out right in the middle. And I decided to leave a little portion of that in the middle of the recording so you can hear that, where she switched devices, and it worked out just fine. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Tracy B. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, God, yeah. Just thinking about power outages, I remember recording someone in the middle of our interview, the power went out, and I panicked. And I was really grateful that Zoom was able to capture the first half and save it. And the second half, we just kind of kept going from there, and it worked. I was able to edit it together.
Well, I have a backup plan and a backup for my backup. So
cool. Yeah. We do have Tracy here on the podcast, and welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And so, before the recording, we were just talking about you're in the middle of an ice storm.
We are indeed. I am in Virginia, and it's insane. And I'm from California, so this is just wild weather.
Yeah.
I'm not used to that. Had a branch fall on my fireplace today.
Jeez. Yeah.
Now I'm here on candlelight, so it's all good.
Yeah. So at the start of the podcast episode, I usually like to ask about the 3 circles. And again, it doesn't have to be all of the activities, but kind of a basic idea of what's in your inner, middle, and outer circle. And are you comfortable with sharing that?
Absolutely. Yeah. My circles have gotten much simpler over time. They were very, very busy at first. And now my center circle consists of no alcohol, drugs, no sex outside of my marriage, no intentional flirting, no intentional fantasizing, and no male buddies, no male friends that are outside of my marriage.
Okay.
And what I mean by intentional fantasizing and flirting is sometimes I'll start to do something and then I'll catch myself.
Yeah.
Right, stop it immediately, then that's okay. It's not a relapse.
Yeah, with fantasy, I have a couple of people who wanted to put fantasy in their inner circle, and it's like sometimes your brain will go somewhere, exactly. And it's the intentional. I have them rephrase it and make sure that they focus on the intentional.
Yeah. My middle circle is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, gossiping, not taking calls from sponsees, missing meetings, not taking care of myself physically, eating healthy, sleeping, taking medication, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And my outer circle is a lot of art. I do all kinds of different art. I work with a lot of women, go to meetings, stay honest, work on my marriage, play with my pets, garden, just stuff that fills my soul, prayer, meditation, the usual outer circle groovy stuff.
Nice. Something that I wanted to mention was that I was introduced to you from our friend Diana, who's in Sacramento, Last summer, I did a summer of sponsorship workshop, and she was one of the panelists. And I've known her for quite a few years. I remember meeting her at our Bay Area retreat, and so it was great. She and I are friends on Facebook, and she texted me, and it's like, I think Tracy would be really good for the podcast, and so I'm super grateful for her for connecting us and enabling this to happen.
Yeah, Diana is absolutely wonderful and instrumental in helping me start this group. So, yeah, she's a huge part of my recovery.
Awesome. Before getting to the group, I'd like to hear your story about how you found your way to the rooms of SAA. Earlier, we were talking about another S program, and
Right.
we can kind of go into that. Any childhood stuff that you feel comfortable
Yeah,
sharing?
absolutely. When I was born, I suffered some pretty severe sensory deprivation. My mother was institutionalized, and I had been left in a room, a dark room by myself for a pretty long time. I had burns from diaper rash.
Wow.
And I think that that really started me on a kind of a screwed up journey to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
As I was growing up, when I was, 3, 4, 5, my sister, oldest sister, was acting out and very cruel. Locked me in a spider closet, is what we called it. It was an attic, and
Mm-hmm.
it was, full of cobwebs, and there was no light. And she locked me in there and left me there. And I remember curling up in a little ball and fantasizing that there was a chute, like a hole right next to me. And if I got really scared, I could drop into it and it would shoot me right down into the sunny basement, into the
Mm.
laundry. And I had this vivid fantasy, so clear, but I was going to be brave and not go there. But I had it there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's this loneliness and this fantasy life that I created to survive. There was a lot of abuse. My sister and I since are very, very close. She's made full amends and been
Mm-hmm.
forgiven, by the way. But if I told on her, I would get in trouble for tattling and get spanked. So that kind of set me up for being bullied or picked on and not
Mm-hmm.
having, any options. My folks divorced when I was like 5, and that opened the door for a lot of molestations that started happening with family friends and uncles and people in my life. My mother remarried when I was 7, and he was my hero. Loved him. He taught me a lot, taught me to ride a bike, and he was just this great guy. And then when I was 11, I was watching him molest my sister in the next bed.
Oh.
And then when she moved out, it started on me. So at 15, I got married so I could be emancipated because my mother chose to stay married to him. And that one always stung, right? It was like
Mm-hmm.
she chose a pedophile over me, and I was just pissed. And I had no boundaries whatsoever at that point because obviously my body didn't belong to me. It belonged to whoever wanted me. And starting at age 11, between 11 and 12, I started acting out sexually and just went on rampages. And I was ridiculously promiscuous.
Mm.
So at 15, I married and I dropped out of school. I ended up getting my GED later, but I would then become a serial wife. Basically, I would get married and divorced and married and divorced. And I went through 4 husbands by the time
Wow.
I was 34.
Jeez. Wow.
I loved getting married. It was so fun. I like the beginning part, the falling in love part. I didn't like the work, but
Yeah.
um, I had 3 beautiful sons and was, not the greatest mom. I chose men over my boys. Sadly, I regret that. But again, I have made amends and they are wonderful and very close to me to this day. They are amazing young men. I got addicted to one in particular relationship that I could not get out of. And it was insane. And I
Mm.
kept going back and kept going back. And it was painful. I knew there was something wrong with me. I would just go act out, go to a bar, pick up on a guy, act out, drive home, see someone on the side of the road, act out with him. And it was just this trying to escape my feelings, obviously, a
Mm-hmm.
drug, get a huge hit, and then the crash. And then I'd need another hit, just like any other drug. But I knew something was wrong but I had this kind of great denial where it was like I was fine, and it was this split personality, right? Which I think a lot of us can relate to, living that double life. I had a friend call me and ask if I wanted to sneak into a Sexaholics Anonymous meeting with her because she wanted to become a chemical dependency counselor, but she had to go to 5 12-step meetings, and she really wanted to go to this, but you couldn't go unless you were a sex addict. And I'm like, that sounds really fun. Let's see who we can meet at this meeting. I mean, I was just super sick. And we went to the meeting. There was about 60 men in the meeting. And the minute they started talking, I burst into tears. She was across the room from me and like mouthing, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know." But what it was I was hearing the truth for the first time ever. And it blew my mind that people were telling the truth. And I related so much to so much of it. I knew that I was home, and I had just been so full of resentment and anger. And, I used to say that it's like July. I built a snowman in December, and it's July, and I'm running back and forth to my past, grabbing snowballs to keep it alive from melting. And this is my whole existence. It's just exhausting trying to keep all the drama alive. And it was like when I was in a meeting, all of that just stopped, and I could rest, and my shoulders dropped, and I could breathe. So I kept going to that meeting. I turned myself into Alcoholics Anonymous because I also was picking up guys in bars, and someone suggested, "You might want to quit drinking." And I'm like, why would I want to do that? So my sobriety date is the same in both programs.
Oh, nice.
November 14th of 2002. And I've been able to maintain my sobriety date, which is purely miraculous to me, purely God. When I got there, the thing that really struck me was how much like heroin my addiction felt like. Like I had an IV drip that I could hit anytime with euphoric recall and get the exact same hit that I would get if I was acting out. Like I could remember an incident and it was happening in my body, right? And how do you fight a drug like that? How do you get that? And then that headspace of it always, the fantasy, living in the fake life. I didn't know how to separate myself from that. And starting my first step, I used the group as a sponsor because there were no women. There was one woman who spoke very little English. And so I used the group as a sponsor, wrote out my first step. It was 27 pages.
Wow.
I knocked it down to 10 pages. But when I read it, again, there's about 60 men in this meeting, and I'm reading this first step and I'm sobbing and snotting and just losing my mind. Very humiliated. It's very quiet in the room. And when I was done, I mean, I have my head hanging down and you could hear a pin drop. It was just silence. And I was, of course, mortified. And immediately the room burst into applause. And the men, I looked up, they were crying and so moved. And it was just like, oh my God. They started sharing, and they were saying things to me like, I was the guy that raped you. I was the guy that molested you. And I am so sorry for every man that ever hurt you. And it was like this intense healing moment for me that someone saw me and apologized. And
your audio is frozen. Looks like you're almost back.
okay.
All right. Back up.
Sorry about that. I told you I'd back up though.
Yep. Yep.
So these men were apologizing. It was one of the most healing moments of my life. I've never been moved like that someone took responsibility for hurting me. And it just hit a place in me that healed something so deep. I have never forgotten it. And I fell in love with those men, and they were my brothers, and that was the end of it. And I was going to stick around. I hadn't really figured out my higher power yet. I was working on it. There was a gentleman sitting next to me at a meeting one evening, and he started talking about molesting his stepdaughter. and I lost my mind. I jumped from my chair and I hit the door running, got in my car. It was pouring rain. I got in my car. I started driving. I'm cussing out God. How dare you? How dare you open me up like that and then put me next to that guy? Blah, 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 blah. Just screaming furiously. My car spun out, hit a curb under an overpass, and died. And it scared me. I jumped out of my car and I heard an audible booming voice inside my body that said, "Who do you think you are? You're judging my beloved son." And I was like, what the hell?
Wow.
Hit the ground, sobbing, soaking wet, just like it was literally the voice of God saying, you're just as sick as him. You're just as sick. Who do you think you are? And I got back in my car. I drove back to that meeting. I walked back in soaking wet and I sat down next to that man, and I never judged another sex addict from that day forward because it was the most humbling experience of my life.
Wow.
I am just so grateful for that moment because I had so much judgment, but it was true. I'm just as sick as everyone else in that room.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my higher power moment when I woke up. I had a sponsor in AA. She was having affairs, but she knew the steps.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with her. In the meantime, the men of Sexaholics Anonymous sent me to the World Conference. They raised money and they sent me so I could find a sponsor,
Wow.
which was amazing. Again, those men saved my life. They really did. So I did find a sponsor. She let me talk to her for 15 minutes once a week. And if she didn't like what I said, she'd hang up on me. She had great boundaries.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mostly continued to use the group. So in 2003, I met my husband. He had 15 years sober in AA, and we maintained my abstinence completely, never even held my hand. He was amazing. And he proposed to me on my 1-year birthday.
Nice.
And yeah, in Maui, no less, which was super sweet. But when I went back to the meeting, they said I could no longer claim my sobriety because I was moving in with him. And they said, you can't claim sobriety because you're not married with a piece of paper. And that was not okay with me. I was in a committed relationship. I'd worked really hard to maintain my sobriety. So I decided to start a meeting in my own home. And I had a lot of women that I was sponsoring in Alcoholics Anonymous and some in SA as well. And God just kept sending me these sex addict women in AA. And they were almost all sex addicts by the time we got through their fourth step, their sex inventory. I'm like, I got a program for you. So we started a meeting in my home. That was 2003, 2004. In 2006, I got a bunch of SAA literature. I was working out of the big book at that time, out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know you did that same thing. You worked that program. Just changed the name from alcoholic to sex addict or whatever, lust. And I tried to get an SAA meeting up and going, and I was not successful. Women I couldn't get them to stick, It's hard. It's really easy for us to romanticize our addiction, I think for a lot of the guys, especially with porn or getting caught, with a prostitute or something, it's different for you guys. It's a little harder to deny the reality of it. But with the women, we can sugarcoat the hell out of it. So in 2009, everything changed. I was at a women's conference for AA, and I saw Diana, who was, she was speaking. And Diana and I had worked together years earlier, and we did not.
Kidding. Wow.
We did not like each other at all. She was kind of this hardcore lesbian, tough girl, and I was this cutesy little flirt, and we had zero in common and avoided each other, to put it politely, just did not like each other. And I heard her speaking, and I was like, I really owe that person an amends because I had a lot of judgment about her, and I need to get that shit cleaned up. So I sent her a message on Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and she responded.
and made an amends in kind. And we started talking a little bit. And it just so happened she was in the process of burning her life to the ground in sex addiction, and asked me if I could sponsor her. And I absolutely was happy to do that. And so she ended up going into treatment. And in treatment, she went to SAA meetings. And then when she came out, she had a real solid SAA program. And so the women I had been bringing to my house once a week, we started the SAA group at that point. That's where we call them the warrior women. That crew started there. There was about 7 or 8 of us at the time, who about 7 of them are still sober to this day and still with us. So it's been an amazing journey. The first thing we did is we created what I called an intimacy pact, because I didn't trust women at all for obvious reasons. And they had the same kinds of experience with women, where women had hurt them or betrayed them or whatever. So I suggested that we just not have any secrets amongst any of us. We were going to learn to be intimate in this group right here and see what that looks like. I also was a big fan of the 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And I asked every one of the women to read that book so we could all be coming from the same page of not taking things personally and being impeccable with our word and not making assumptions and doing our best. So that has been something we've maintained through the years. So that group started really growing quickly. And by 2011, I had 25 women on my back lawn because we could no longer fit on the patio or in the living room. It just kept getting bigger. And my husband said, it's time to start an outside meeting. He had been very sweet. He had been a shining example of what a man should be, and he was very good to the women I sponsored and very helpful. So we started our first outside meeting. And there was 8 of us in the room. And when men started coming in, they were shocked, to say the least. Usually it's 1 woman and a bunch of men. This time it was 1 man and a bunch of women. And thank God Diana was there, because she's gay and she could sponsor the men.
Yeah.
That's why I say she saved us on that front. She really did. So there are 7 meetings now a week in that area. So that's how our crew started. And then the sponsorship lineage is what's made the warrior group thrive, I believe. That consistency, we sponsor the same exact way, and we know it works because the women who started it are still sober. And so the women who really, really want it and are willing to go to any length and do the deal. I mean, those women, those first, probably 20 women agreed to spend a year of abstinence and a full year of no sex with self, no sex outside of, no sex at all, actually, and no masturbation. And I mean, they were hardcore, really, really wanting this. I have since lightened up a bit on that and allow people to choose for themselves what they want to do. But the thing was, the women that would come in, they didn't want to go to mixed meetings. But to me, the mixed meetings are vital.
Yeah.
I mean, the men can't objectify you when you share your story and you become their sister or their mom or their daughter, right? And the same went the other direction. Like, I can't objectify you anymore. You are my brother now, and how I relate to you. So I would request that all the women read their first steps at mixed meetings. And the power of that was just, I just think there's nothing more powerful than hearing the opposite sex read a first step. It's such a great wake-up call. And so to this day, we have women in Hawaii, California, Oregon, Nashville, Florida, New York, Virginia, and they're all sponsoring other women in those states. So it's like we've gone coast to coast pretty much and across the Pacific with this lineage. And I have a Zoom meeting on Tuesday nights, but the only women that are on those meetings are women who are actively being sponsored by one of us, basically, someone. So there's great, like, in that lineage. And it is a powerful group of women. And I have just seen miracles. I mean, just absolute messes who are now happy, joyous, and free with children and husbands and lives. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. I have a in-person fellowship here in Virginia that I love. I have a group of women that I sponsor here now, and they're sponsoring women, and their sponsees are sponsoring. And
nice.
It's so cool. It's just such a great way to spend a life, you know? It really is. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you started off in Northern California and
Yeah.
with the patio meeting.
Yep.
And then so you were able to branch that out to where you are in Virginia and on Zoom. Yeah, that's amazing.
It worked out really well because we moved like right when COVID hit. And so, you know, the meetings were going to be on Zoom anyway. And I did not want to move. I was not happy about it. My mom was sick, and part of my living amends to her was to be here with her until she passed. And we bought a home here, and now you know, it's lovely. And I miss California and a lot, but I knew God put me here for a reason. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful to be honored enough to sponsor these women and to be a part of this group of warriors. And they really are just incredible warriors. I love my life.
Yeah.
And I'm still married to the same guy. 22 years, right? How crazy is that?
Yeah. So I don't know my exact date of when I came into the rooms of SAA, but it was November of 2002.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So,
class of two.
Yeah, I haven't been sober that whole time.
That's
but,
okay.
So yeah, it was November evening when I got caught and went to my first SAA meeting. I think a day or two after that. So it was early November of 2002. So
that's a rough time to get sober right before the holidays.
Yeah. And it was weird too, because I can remember going to meetings for a couple of weeks in a row. And then the holidays hit and the new year starts. My wife starts nudging me. Are you ever going to go back to those meetings? And I'm just like, oh yeah, I should get on that. The holidays, I did take a break from it, and I was only going to one meeting a week at the time. And
my God.
Yeah, obviously didn't have a lot of sobriety there at the beginning. Took a couple of years.
Yeah, I lived in meetings. I mean, I was very lucky to be, I retired early, and I was able to go to, 2 AA meetings and an SA meeting every day. And
nice.
I lived in alkathons during the holidays too, which was super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my friends who's been on the podcast a number of times, he, during his early days, and this was in the age of Zoom, was doing 4 meetings a day. And
yeah, that's how you stay sober.
Yeah, this is what I need to do to maintain sobriety, and it doesn't work for everyone, but just being able to do that, the thing that I love in-person meetings. There's nothing like it for me, but having that ability just to hit a link and be on a meeting is amazing.
It is amazing, and there's some really, really good quality Zoom meetings out there, and a lot of women's meetings as well, which is something that you really couldn't find prior. Finding a women's SAA meeting, I think in the Bay Area, you guys have them.
We did. I don't know if we still do.
They're hard to keep open.
I remember my home meeting. We had, this is pre-COVID. We had 4 women showing up on a consistent basis. One of the things that we did is made sure with the service rotations that we had the women. There were at least 2 in a row were the secretary for the meeting. So when women come in and see a woman chairing the meeting, that was able to bring in more women, and they stuck around for a long time and decided to start their own women's meeting. Problem is there were very few of them, and so when it came time for service rotation, everyone gets burnt out and it's like,
Yep.
yeah, I'm not willing to take on this service position anymore. And as enough of them start dropping off, the meeting no longer exists and we have to cancel that meeting. So
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what happened here in Virginia as well. Is when I showed up at a meeting, there was one girl that was showing up consistently. And she, I was like, oh, you're my sponsee. And she's like, you're my sponsor, just immediately. And the women that came in after that were women who had come in before, but there was no women. So they just left and didn't come back. So every one of the women that's come in since then has been, women that were looking for other women. And it's hard to go to meetings just with men only. I worked in a male dominated field, so it didn't bother me. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. So the similar experience when one of my best friends in the program, when she delivered her first step at our meeting, she broke down at a certain point, and we gave her the encouragement to keep going. And to this day, this is the only first step that I've seen a standing ovation for.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We had one that's very powerful she was a prostitute, and her story was so powerful that the men were speechless afterward, and just I would see some of them years later and they would say, I've never forgotten that first step. That changed my life. And it's just, they're so powerful.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people, a lot of men in the program that in their early sobriety and have difficulty at mixed meetings, or their partners won't allow them to go to mixed meetings. And I find it so unfortunate because of the stories that I've heard. All of the meetings when I first started the program, they were always mixed, but even being a mixed meeting, we were still 95% men.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I go up to the San Francisco and there'd be a lot more women at the meetings there.
Yeah.
But a couple of my friends I know have used podcast episodes for speaker shares at their meetings with
women. What a
women.
great idea.
Yeah. So it's a men's meeting. They don't have the ability to hear women's stories. So they've used the podcast as a way of carrying the story. And so they get to hear. And it's an amazing new tool to be able to do something like that. And
it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that. Beautiful.
Yeah. Several years ago, we did a workshop, a half-day workshop. It started off as a way of discussing, this came out of our intergroup, discussing women's retention in meetings.
Right.
And we flew out someone from Arizona or New Mexico. I can't remember which. This is probably 10 years ago, so I don't really remember. But they had, their population was close to 50-50.
Yeah. That's where my sponsor lives, actually, is in Arizona.
Yeah. And so that was just like, okay, what are you doing that we're not? And so we invited her out to be a guest speaker. And so we did like a speaker meeting, and we also had several other things going on as a half-day workshop. And
beautiful.
Yeah, it was really awesome. And I'm hoping that we can do something like that again. But
absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that's where Diana and I went to the very first women's SAA conference in Arizona together in, I think that was also in 2011. And that's where I met my current sponsor, who has 38 years or some crazy thing. But yeah, they have a really, really good group of women down there.
Yeah. Are you involved at all in the Women's Outreach Committee with the ISO?
No, I was for a while, but I am not now, just simply because we have so many women here that I'm working with, and I've just been focused on that a lot. I know Diana is getting more involved in intergroup up in her area, which is super exciting. And who knows, that may, I may expand out into that. I was on the grace list for quite a while for women to reach out to. With my sponsees, we use an app called Marco Polo. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, I haven't used it. My mom and my sister use it to communicate with one of my friends. We had an exchange student when I was in high school and from Germany. And so they Marco Polo each other and stuff. So I get to hear my mom talk about it. I've never used it. So, but
I
yeah.
love that app. It's amazing because I can see their faces as they're talking. And then when it's convenient for me, I can listen to it and respond in, my time. And then that way we still have a face to face, but we're not pinned down.
Yeah, face to face on demand, I guess. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm so glad you had invited me to do this. This has just been delightful, and I'm in love with this program. I really am. It's my world, and I just think that there's no better way to spend a life than of service. I mean, it's what brings joy, and it seems so counterintuitive, just like everything else in the program. It's upside down and backwards. You give a key to a bunch of idiots and they open the door and you give them the money, it trickles upward to the top. And and the same goes for sponsorship. It's just one goofy addict helping another goofy addict, and it magically turns probably some of the worst, most selfish people on the planet into some of the kindest, most generous people that you'll ever want to meet. I just, people used to ask me, aren't you afraid to go to a meeting with a bunch of male sex addicts? And the truth is, I feel safer in those meetings than I would anywhere else on the planet. They're all on the same path, right? On a path of spiritual recovery.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you wanted to share before we close out the episode?
I think the only thing I didn't really mention is one of my favorite analogies of sponsorship, and that is, I call it flashlight toes. When we get here, we have little teeny weeny lights on the tips of our toes, and we can see about 2 inches in front of us, and we're on a very scary dark path. And a sponsor is someone who has a mag light, who has walked the path ahead of us and takes a few steps ahead and says, okay, watch out on your right there. There's a hole. Take 2 steps to the left. There's a snake next to you. Don't move for a minute, right? And kind of just guides the sponsee one step at a time out of that dark place and into a beautiful open meadow where they meet their higher power. And that's my job as a sponsor, is simply to put my sponsee's hand into the hand of their higher power. And that's all I can do. And I can't force them to walk the path because it's scary and treacherous. But if they're willing, then it's a magnificent journey.
Wow, that is a great way of thinking about it. As you're mentioning it, I was thinking about it in my head, and it's like, that is apropos.
A lot of snakes in the woods you got to watch out for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I'm so glad that we were able to do this. I know that I've been having a difficult time trying to actually schedule people. It's like, I'll get you on, pretty soon, and I'll reach out to you, and I just haven't been. And over the past couple of weeks, I've gotten people lined up for the next several, and so I'm really grateful that we were able to do this.
Me too. And if you ever need women, I know a lot of amazing women that would be more than happy to share their stories with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Many thanks to Tracy for joining me on this conversation. I had such a fantastic time, and I am hoping to have her back on the podcast. After our recording, we exchanged quite a few more emails. She had mentioned, like many others on the podcast, I wish I would have mentioned this, or this. So always a future episode available to touch on those topics. Among the things that she emailed me about were various pieces of music. Tracy has written and sung many songs that are posted on various places. I'm not going to be putting the links up on this episode due to anonymity, but I will be playing some clips of a few of her songs, and they're so awesome, as well as a song suggestion that she had. And while I'm thinking about Tracy and Diana and the Sacramento meetings, I had mentioned at the beginning of this episode the Summer of Sponsorship workshop that I was part of last summer. And the Sacramento groups are going to do another sponsorship workshop this spring at the same location. If you're interested, please let me know and I can get you further details. I also wanted to mention that I'll be leaving information on the book that Tracy mentioned in our conversation called The 4 Agreements, and I'll put that in the show notes for this episode. And that book is organized via explorations of the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Do not take anything personally. Do not make assumptions, and always do your best. So look for that in the show notes. So before moving on to the music, I wanted to read an email that just came in this week. And along with this email, I will be reading from the Green Book. And the email says, "Hi, Jason. My name is A, and I'm a sex addict in Ontario, Canada. I first want to thank you so much for your service, for enabling this forum for people to share their stories and the experience, strength, and hope. I was in another S fellowship over 20 years ago, drifted away to do additional research, and only recently, this past October, have found the rooms of SAA after D-Day with my wife and finally admitting to the unmanageability of my addiction. I've been sober, pornography and masturbation, since then on October 16th, 2024. I found this podcast by accident while searching YouTube for resources on sex addiction, and it has been such a huge support for me. I'm now at episode 141 and planning on re-listening to episodes once I get to the end of the list. The honesty, humility, and authenticity I hear from you and your guests is really inspiring. I'm writing to get your feedback on an issue which I've had to deal with recently and which has come up a few times in the podcast. I will be indirect in my description for reasons described later. I trust you can fill in the blanks. In episode 3, you shared your story and actually came out and talked about your viewing of a particular type of pornography. My mind was really blown at this. It was the first time I had ever heard anyone talk so openly and honestly about this. Viewing this type of material has also been part of my acting out behavior, and your sharing helped me feel less alone. Hearing some of your guests share on this topic was similarly powerful. This sharing inspired me to be more open about my acting out behavior in my SAA groups. In one of the Zoom groups I attend, I shared on my viewing of such material. A short while afterwards, I got a direct message from another member, he is the founder of that particular group, advising me not to share anything that could put the rest of the group at risk. I asked him to clarify, and we subsequently had a phone conversation about it. I admit I didn't follow his argument in its entirety, but the gist of it was this. If the police got wind of it, they could conceivably subpoena the content of the meeting, which would put the rest of the members' anonymity at risk. He said I could ask ChatGPT about it. I felt a little skeptical, but also felt difficult to assert myself since he seemed so confident and categorical, and also because of my fear of confrontation. I mentioned to him that I've heard people sharing openly and honestly on an SAA podcast put out by the Bay Area Intergroup, which inspired me to share openly. I asked him why they would allow this to be shared if it was indeed putting other members at risk. He replied by saying, "I think they're being foolish." Then he told me that if I shared in such a way in that particular meeting, he would be forced to ban me from the meeting. My initial reaction to the whole thing was fury and resentment. He was pretty aggressive in his approach and seemed to be going against some of the traditions. I think he was making himself the authority of the group, Tradition 2, and then assuming this authority to threaten kicking me out of the group, Tradition 3. I called my sponsor, and my sponsor told me, "This guy's a fucking idiot. Just keep doing what you're doing." I called another group member who said he thought I had the right to share what I wanted, but that he himself would be hesitant to share on such details in a group. I talked to my wife, and she's generally very fearful of me sharing those details, as she is concerned for my legal safety. And my therapist didn't think there was any real danger of the police getting involved in the meeting, but he did tell me that another one of his clients almost got reported to the police by his SAA group because one particular member was having a vendetta against him, specifically because of the material he was viewing. I've since become more circumspect in sharing details during meetings, especially Zoom meetings, where someone could potentially record without others' knowledge. I definitely have mixed feelings about this. I was hoping you could shine some light on this issue for me. You and your other guests have shared on this topic. I believe some of them have already shared the information with authorities, but some have not. And then I heard the episode talking about the Fellow Travelers Recovery Intergroup. And on their website is clearly and boldly stated, revealing current, recent, and unreported illegal activities puts all attendees in a challenging position of either reporting such activity or being an accessory to criminal activity. Just don't do it. So all in all, I'm pretty confused. I like the honesty of sharing fully, but I also don't want to put myself and others at risk. Would really appreciate your thoughts on this. Thanks for reading this long email. Best, A. Thank you so much for this email. There's so much to go through on this. I have my definite thoughts and opinions, and I've talked to other program members about this before responding to this on the podcast. Like mentioned in the reading at the beginning, there was a section in the Safe and Sober meetings on the boundary statement in the Green Book on page 12. And so I did want to read from that, and then I will get to some specifics on this email. And I'm going to actually start on the bottom of page 11. And it says, over the years, our groups have developed different formats and customs. Although no detailed description is valid for all meetings, there are some general principles and guidelines followed by most groups. We listen respectfully to what others have to say and share our experience as it seems appropriate. We use the words I or we instead of you when sharing about our recovery. We do not interrupt or give advice unless asked. We addressed our sharing to the whole group, not to one or more individuals. A meeting is not a place to meet sexual partners, nor is it group therapy. We try not to use offensive language or descriptions that are too explicit. We avoid mentioning specific names or places associated with our acting out behavior. Because of the nature of our addiction, we are careful about touching or giving hugs to others in the fellowship without permission. Our focus remains on the solution rather than the problem. We strive to practice anonymity and confidentiality so that the meeting will be a safe place for each and every sex addict. We generally only use our first names in the group to help ensure anonymity. Whom we meet or what is said in a meeting is treated as confidential and is not discussed with non-group members. I'm going to skip a paragraph. Meetings are places where we can drop our emotional defenses and get honest in a way we are rarely able to experience outside of the fellowship. SAA is one of the very few places where we can talk candidly about our sexual behavior without fear of judgment or ridicule. Once we break our self-imposed silence, we are able to be more honest and to form stronger bonds with members of our group. It is these bonds that enrich our recovery process. In time, we learn to trust our fellow members and to receive their trust in us. Many things happen in our groups that are important for recovery. We share our experience with each other, which reminds us that we have a common illness and that we are not alone. By sharing our stories, we remind ourselves of our progress in recovery, and we give each other hope. We recognize ourselves as we used to be and commit even more deeply to the changes we are making. Being open to the experience, strength, and hope of others can also give us new strategies and attitudes to try in our own recovery. We can take what works for us and leave the rest. At the same time, sharing our experience with others helps to reduce our shame and pain. Not only do other members understand the pain we are feeling, they are willing to help. And I'm going to stop there. I have so many thoughts on the subject. First of all, the meeting that you were referencing sounds like an unhealthy meeting. You brought up traditions 2 and 3, and I did want to read a little from the Green Book on that. Tradition 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as expressed in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. The second tradition builds on the principle of SAA unity. In all aspects of the program, our wisdom derives from the group, not from any single individual. Moving on to tradition 3, the only requirement for SAA membership is a desire to stop addictive sexual behavior. The third tradition protects us from the human tendency to set up applications, tests, qualification procedures, or other demands that are meant to control membership of groups. No one can judge whether or not another person is a sex addict or make decision about someone's fitness for membership in SAA. So if a meeting is having regular group conscience meetings, business meetings, and have clear guidelines on what can be shared and what cannot be shared, that is up to the group. Any single individual that has a problem with something that someone said falls outside of that. Our meetings are anonymous. People should be using their first names, and we should not be sharing any information that is said in the meetings. In my 22 years in the program, I have never felt unsafe to say anything in a meeting. Sometimes it's a little bit scary. The first time I read my first step, I was definitely terrified to share about my viewing of child pornography. When I've been asked to share at meetings, the more and more I talk about it, the easier it is to talk about, and the shame that is associated with it starts to drift away, and I can help heal from that. Additionally, when I do share about that, that makes it known to others that they are not alone in the struggle, that many other people are going through the same thing. So in addition to the local Bay Area meetings in person pre-pandemic, I've spoken at many meetings on Zoom, whether they are international meetings or localized meetings. I've spoken at Chicago, New York, Florida, Scotland, other parts of the UK as a speaker, and every time I share about my experience and how I identify as a minor attracted person that has had issues with child pornography. I also talk about being an intimacy and sexual avoidant. So being able to talk about those things opens up conversations and others willing to talk about that aspect of their program. That being said, the Fellow Travelers Intergroup has set up meetings that are safe places for minor attracted persons to share open and honestly about what's going on with them. Several people are going through the legal system in those meetings, and a lot of them go beyond viewing child pornography. They include molestation. And when there is active molestation going on, sometimes there are mandatory reporters in those meetings. And so that's why they advise not to share things like that unless you've cleared it with law enforcement. Speaking of law enforcement, I've never heard of anyone calling the police to report on what someone said in a meeting. In the age of Zoom, it is easier to record people. I know in all of our Bay Area meetings, we have the record function locked out, so people can't sit there and record the meeting. At our noon group, right at the beginning, we have this statement that says, "This meeting is only available to its attendees and should not be broadcast or recorded except for segments of special meetings with prior notification and announcement." And that last clause was for whenever we're doing first step or speaker share recordings for the podcast. Additionally, every meeting in the Bay Area has some semblance of this at the end of each meeting. As a gentle reminder for all of us, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. What you heard was spoken in confidence and should be treated as confidential. Who you see here, what you hear here, let it stay here. Whatever problems you have, there are those among us who have had them too. If you keep an open mind, you will find help. Let us talk to one another and reason things out, but let us not gossip or criticize each other. Instead, let the understanding, love, and peace of the program grow in each of us one day at a time. So I wanted to tie this back to Tracy's share, where she talked about sitting next to a person who had molested someone, and she got up in outrage. And what she had to say, go back and listen to it. She may not like what was going on, but that person was just as sick as any other individual in that room that is seeking recovery. So for me, sharing that you have a problem with child pornography or other things, you should be able to share that at a meeting. If you're not welcome to share that at a meeting, find another meeting that you are able to share that information. I've been to hundreds of meetings around the world, like I had mentioned, I've felt very safe sharing anything that I need to in confidentiality. So we all know that doing heroin is illegal. And imagine being at a meeting for Narcotics Anonymous or something like that, where you're not able to share that you were doing heroin. How is recovery going to happen? I put my story at the beginning of the podcast on episode 3, not only to let our future guests know what we're able to share, but also to let our listeners know that we will be talking about stuff like this. Occasionally, there's been times where there has been some oversharing during the recording, and I choose to edit that out as necessary. Additionally, past guests have been going through a legal process that they did not want that information out there in the public, and have asked those episodes to be removed from public viewing, and I honor that. And this is another reason why we keep our names anonymous, and I do not use the video for the YouTube channel, that we stay anonymous. So what we can share is honest. Some people have chosen different aliases because they didn't feel comfortable, or have chosen to have their voices altered, and I've done that in the past as well. But having this podcast out there in the public, if you listen to the beginning, the whole reason we set this up was to help break the stigma of sex addiction. Having the ability to talk about it is crucial. I can keep talking about this, but lastly, I just do want to reemphasize that each group is autonomous and can figure out what is okay or not okay, provided that they do that as a group. And having a regular monthly business meeting to go over those things, or an annual group inventory, really helps keep a meeting healthy. And so if you have a founder of a meeting decide what is or what is not okay for the rest of the group, that doesn't sound like a healthy meeting to me. And that is just my opinion. I hope I was able to answer any questions that you might have. If you need a healthy place to be able to share, I know of several meetings. So don't be afraid to email me and ask me about meetings that are safe to share whatever you need to. Thank you so much for that. And I'm really grateful for having that email and to be able to talk about this here on the podcast. Okay. So with that, I'm going to move on to some music and make things feel a little better. Music is my go-to, the way I connect with my higher power. And Tracy had sent so many songs via email. She shared a lot of songs that she had written, and I really adore. Normally, I post links to the songs that I use on the podcast, but whenever someone is using their full name, I choose not to link that, but I will be playing a couple of Tracy's songs. I wanted to read a couple of her emails and play the songs. And this one says, a couple of songs I wrote, just on a side note. I know music is a big part of your world as it is mine. I don't play an instrument, but I wrote most of these with GarageBand, and others were collaborative. And this is one that was a collaboration. It is a song called Amen. So I wanted to play that here.
No embarrassment, no shame. Coming to these doors is a beginning, not an end. What's said in here, what's heard in here, it stays in here, amen. Amen.
Man, after listening to that and some of the other songs, love Tracy's voice and her passion. Awesome song. And she did share another one that's kind of got a bluegrass feel that she wrote on her back patio using some loops. I'm not going to play that one here, but yeah, I love that one too. Another email that I got back from her that says, I see what you mean about afterthoughts, LOL. I thought of 800 things I'd wish that I had said. And like I had mentioned, I'm so eager to have her back on the podcast again. So those 800 other things can be for another episode. If you pick one of my songs, I'd like it to be a song called The Broken Places. And so here is that song.
You used to think you had no reason to live. Here you find yourself in the joy of forgiving and showing others how. they could be living now with love and faith. It's finally coming together. Old way of living gone forever. You found a new plan, 'cause now you understand that the light shines brightest through the broken places. So all those stories of who you used to be can be set up in smoke in other misery, and you can shine. Yeah, you can shine from those broken places.
Such a beautiful song. Love that. And another email. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story tonight. Please share whatever music you want after the podcast. Teddy Swims is my newest obsession. I absolutely love his voice. And I had not listened to Teddy Swims and find out that there are millions and millions of people listening to this. I chose the song Lose Control.
Problematic. Problem is I want your body like a fiend, like a bad habit. Bad habits hard to break when I'm with you. Yeah, I know I can do it on my own, but I want that real full moon black magic, and it takes two. Problematic. Problem is when I'm with you, I'm an addict, and I need some relief. My skin and your teeth can't see the forest through the trees. Got me down on my knees, darling, please. I lose control when you're not next to me. I'm falling apart right in front of you. Can't you see? I lose control when you're not next to me. Yeah, you're breaking my heart, baby. You make a mess of me.
Damn, that guy has got some pipes. I can easily see why he'd be your latest obsession. Man, he's got such an awesome voice. Kind of reminds me of the soul of CeeLo, but with some grit. So yeah, I want to check out some of his other songs. Thank you so much for that, Tracy. I think that will do it for this episode. If you did want to share some songs, have any feedback about any particular episodes, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you wanted to get a hold of me personally to be a guest on the podcast or have any other questions about the podcast or the program, you can email me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. With that, I will close this one out. Thank you so much for listening to this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.